Karen Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. As 17 teenagers in various states of undress cannonballed into her pristine saltwater pool, the perfectly maintained crystal blue water that she'd had professionally cleaned just yesterday was now churning with Bodie's beach balls, and what appeared to be someone's discarded pizza slice floating near the shallow end. What in the actual? Karen slammed her mug down so hard that coffee splashed across her granite countertop, the same countertop she'd spent 3 hours scrubbing yesterday in preparation for the HOA board meeting she was hosting tonight. Through the French doors leading to her meticulously landscaped backyard, she could see her 16-year-old neighbor, Tyler Henderson, directing traffic like some sort of teenage pool party commander. He was pointing at her outdoor kitchen, gesturing toward her custom-built pergola, and apparently giving someone permission to use her bathroom through the sliding door that Karen was absolutely certain she had locked. Karen's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as she watched Tyler's girlfriend, girl with cotton candy pink hair and a bikini that barely qualified as fabric, drag one of Karen's expensive tick pool chairs toward the deep end to use as a diving platform. "Over my dead body," Karen muttered, her voice carrying the kind of authority that had made her the most feared HOA president Willowbrook Estates had ever seen. She'd been president for 8 years running, unopposed for the last 4, and she hadn't earned that position by letting teenagers treat her property like their personal water park. She marched toward the back door, her sensible flats clicking against the hardwood floors with military precision, but as she reached for the handle, she paused. Through the glass, she could see Tyler had noticed her. Instead of looking apologetic or scrambling to get his friends out of her pool, he was walking toward the door with the kind of casual confidence that made Karen's blood pressure spike. Tyler knocked on the glass door, knocked on her own door. When Karen opened it, he flashed her the same charming smile that had probably gotten him out of trouble his entire life. "Hey, Mrs. Mitchell. Thanks so much for letting us use your pool. This is like super cool of you." Tyler's voice carried that particular blend of teenage entitlement and fake gratitude that Karen had heard from countless young rule breakers. "Over the years, I didn't." Karen started, but Tyler was already talking over her. "I know you and my mom had that whole thing about the fence height, but I told everyone how you're actually pretty chill when you're not in full HOA mode, like you're just looking out for the neighborhood, right?" Karen's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. "Tyler Henderson, I did not give you permission to use my pool. I want you and all your friends out of my backyard immediately." Tyler's smile never wavered. "Come on, Mrs. Mitchell. It's like 90 degrees outside, and our pool's been broken for 2 weeks. Mom said she called you about maybe working something out, and when you didn't call back, she figured it was probably fine if we just used yours. For today, just this once." "Your mother said what?" Karen's voice climbed an octave. She'd received no such call, and even if she had, the idea that silence meant consent was so absurd she couldn't quite process it. "Look, I know you're probably worried about liability or whatever, but we're all good swimmers. Jake's on the dive team, and Madison's literally a lifeguard at the community center. Plus we're not drinking or anything crazy. Just trying to cool off before school starts next week." Behind Tyler, a boy with sun-bleached hair was attempting to do a backflip off Karen's pool's edge, which she'd specifically had installed with a no-diving depth for safety reasons. He belly-flopped spectacularly, sending a wave of water across her newly sealed deck. "That's it." Karen stepped past Tyler and cupped her hands around her mouth. "Everyone out. This is private property, and you're all trespassing." The teenagers in the pool turned to look at her with the kind of blank, uncomprehending stares usually reserved for particularly difficult math problems. A few of them actually giggled. "Mrs. Mitchell, chill out," called the pink-haired girl from her perch on Karen's tick chair. Tyler said it was cool. "We're not hurting anything." "You're not hurting anything." Karen's voice reached a pitch that could probably summon dolphins. "That chair you're sitting on costs more than most people's car payments. The chemicals in this pool are balanced to specific pH levels that will be completely thrown off by 17 bodies, and I have a board meeting here in 6 hours. Tyler put his hands up in what he probably thought was a calming gesture. Okay, I get it. You're stressed about your HOA thing. Look, we'll be super careful, and we'll clear out by like 4. That gives you plenty of time to skim some leaves or whatever before your meeting." "Skim some leaves," Karen repeated slowly, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Skim some leaves." Tyler seemed to finally register that he might have miscalculated. "I just meant, get out." Karen's words cut through the air like a blade. "All of you, out of my pool, off my property. Now, Mrs. Mitchell, you're being kind of unreasonable now." The teenagers in the pool finally seemed to understand that Karen wasn't going to be charmed or reasoned with, but instead of climbing out quickly and apologetically, they began the slow, leisurely process of gathering their things. Clearly in no hurry to end their pool party, Karen watched in mounting horror as one boy shook water from his hair directly onto her outdoor cushions, which she'd brought outside specifically for tonight's meeting. Another girl was wringing out her wet hair over Karen's prize-winning begonias, the ones she'd spent 3 months nurturing for the neighborhood garden competition. "Tyler," Karen said, her voice now carrying the kind of controlled fury that had once made a grown man cry during a particularly heated discussion about mailbox regulations. I want you to know that this isn't over. Your family has exactly 24 hours to submit a formal apology to the HOA board, along with compensation for pool cleaning, chemical rebalancing, and any damage to my property. Tyler actually laughed as he grabbed his towel. Mrs. Mitchell, you can't fine us for using a pool. It's not like we painted our house the wrong color or something, can't I? Karen pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of the chaos in her backyard. Trespassing on private property, unauthorized use of amenities, failure to follow established protocols for community relations, disruption of scheduled board activities, potential damage to landscaping. She rattled off violations like she was reading from a legal document, because in her mind, she essentially was. You're seriously going to HOAUs for swimming? The pink-haired girl looked incredulous. I'm going to HOAU for existing if you don't get off my property in the next 60 seconds, Karen snapped back. Finally, blessedly, the last teenager climbed out of her pool, but as they filed through her gate, dripping water on her carefully maintained walkway, Karen heard Tyler call back over his shoulder. Thanks for the swim, Mrs. Mitchell. Same time tomorrow. Karen stood in her backyard, surveying the damage. Wet footprints covered her deck. Her pool furniture had been rearranged. There were grass clippings in her pool from someone's wet feet, and the water level had dropped noticeably from all the splashing and waves. But worst of all, she could see Tyler through the fence, high-fiving his friends, and already making plans for tomorrow's pool party. They were laughing, probably at her, probably about how they'd gotten away with it. Karen Mitchell had been HOA president for 8 years. She'd successfully lobbied for 17 new regulations, increased property values by 30%, and maintained order in a neighborhood that had previously been described by the city council as aggressively mediocre. She was not about to let a 16-year-old boy and his band of chlorinated delinquents undo 8 years of careful neighborhood management. She walked to her garden shed, past the award-winning roses and the solar lights that she'd fought 3 board meetings to get approved, and pulled out her phone. Her first call was to her insurance company to report potential liability issues and property damage. Her second call was to the non-emergency police line to file a trespassing report. Her third call was to her lawyer, because if Tyler Henderson thought this was over, he was about to learn exactly why Karen Mitchell had never lost an HOA dispute. But as she scrolled through her contacts, looking for the number of the private security company she'd been considering hiring for neighborhood patrols, Karen's eyes fell on something that made her pause. Coiled neatly against the back wall of her shed was 50 feet of industrial-grade fire hose, left over from the Community Emergency Preparedness Initiative she'd spearheaded last year. A slow smile spread across Karen's face. Tyler Henderson wanted to play games with her pool. Well, Karen had spent 8 years learning every rule, regulation, and loophole in the book, and she was about to teach these teenagers that some games had consequences they never saw coming. She picked up the fire hose, testing its weight in her hands. Tomorrow was supposed to be another 90-degree day, and something told her Tyler and his friends were going to be very, very thirsty. The evening board meeting went exactly as Karen had planned. Despite the lingering smell of teenage sunscreen and the suspicious water stains on her deck, she'd managed to get the pool. Karen woke at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her alarm, which was 13 minutes too late for her rapidly evolving plan. She'd spent most of the night lying awake, mentally rehearsing every detail of what she was privately calling Operation Pool Safety. By the time she stumbled to the kitchen for coffee, she'd already run through 17 different scenarios and identified 12 potential legal complications. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from her insurance agent, 2 voicemails from Officer Martinez at the police department, and 1 text message from her lawyer that simply read, "Call me before you do anything dramatic. Steve." Steve Hendricks had been Karen's attorney for 6 years, ever since the infamous mailbox color wars of 2019 that had resulted in 3 cease and desist letters and 1 very awkward mediation session. He knew her well enough to recognize when she was operating in full-scale warfare mode. Karen ignored the text. Steve was excellent at keeping her out of legal trouble, but he had a frustrating tendency to talk her out of her more creative solutions to neighborhood problems. And this morning, creativity was exactly what the situation demanded. She made her coffee extra strong and walked to her back window. Tyler's pool was indeed broken. She could see the empty concrete rectangle from her elevated deck, along with what appeared to be a pump housing sitting in pieces on their patio. No wonder the kid had been so confident about using her pool. In his teenage mind, he probably saw it as a reasonable sharing of neighborhood resources. Karen was about to teach him that reasonable and legal were 2 very different concepts. Her first call was to Acquire Pool Services, the company that maintained her saltwater system. "Hi, this is Karen Mitchell on Willowbrook Drive. I need an emergency chemical rebalancing and full system flush. Yes. Today? No. I understand it's expensive. Unauthorized swimmers, 17 of them. Yes, I'll pay the weekend surcharge. The technician would arrive at noon, which gave Karen exactly what she needed, a legitimate, professional reason to have industrial-grade water equipment on her property. Her second call was to Henderson County Fire Department's non-emergency line. Hi, this is Karen Mitchell, HOA President for Willowbrook Estates. I'm organizing a community emergency preparedness demonstration this afternoon, focusing on fire safety and water damage prevention. I need to confirm the proper procedures for civilian use of emergency water equipment on private property. 20 minutes later, Karen had a detailed understanding of exactly what constituted legal use of fire suppression equipment, proper notification, requirements for public safety demonstrations, and the specific regulations governing water pressure limits for residential areas. More importantly, she'd established a paper trail that would protect her from any potential liability issues. Her third call was to Janet Woolsworth, her most reliable board ally and the person most likely to support Karen's interpretation of emergency community safety protocols. Janet, it's Karen. I need you to help me organize an impromptu community safety demonstration this afternoon. Yes, I know it's Saturday. No, it's not about the teenagers. It's about preparing our residents for potential emergency situations. Well, if certain residents happen to learn something about property boundaries and respect for community standards, that's just an added benefit. Janet was on board within 10 minutes, primarily because she was still annoyed about the Henderson family's recent decision to install a decorative fountain without HOA approval. By the time Karen hung up, she had official board authorization for an emergency water safety demonstration scheduled for 2 p.m. in her backyard. The beauty of Karen's plan wasn't just its legal legitimacy, it was its educational value. She genuinely was going to demonstrate proper emergency water procedures. The fact that these procedures would make her pool completely unusable for unauthorized swimming was simply a fortunate side effect. Karen spent the morning making a dozen more calls. She contacted 3 neighboring HOA presidents to invite them to observe the demonstration, called the local newspaper to offer them a story about community emergency preparedness, and reached out to the fire marshal's office to request an official inspection of her safety procedures. By 11 a.m., what had started as Karen's personal vendetta against Tyler Henderson had evolved into a full-scale community event with official backing, media coverage, and professional oversight. Karen had learned long ago that the best way to handle difficult residents wasn't to act like a petty dictator. It was to become so thoroughly official and professional that resistance became impossible. At 11:30, she walked to her garden shed and carefully laid out the fire hose, checking every connection and testing the water pressure at her outdoor spigot. The hose was designed for emergency situations, which meant it could deliver water at pressures that would make swimming not just unpleasant, but physically impossible. Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Hey Mrs. Mitchell, sorry about yesterday. We'll be more careful today. Pool party starts at 1. She stared at the message for a full minute, her coffee mug trembling slightly in her hand. Tyler Henderson apparently had the survival instincts of a lemming, despite everything that had happened. Yesterday's confrontation, the threats, the official HOA violations, he was actually planning to come back for round 2. Karen texted back, looking forward to seeing you at 1. Tyler, I have a special surprise planned. At noon, the Equickler technician arrived with a truck full of professional pool equipment, including an industrial-grade filtration system that would require multiple water changes to properly clean the pool after yesterday's contamination. Karen met him at the gate with a clipboard and the kind of official smile she reserved for particularly satisfying HOA enforcement actions. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Dave from Equickler. I understand you had some unauthorized swimmers yesterday. 17 teenagers, Karen confirmed, leading him toward the pool. They were in the water for approximately 2 hours without proper chemical testing or safety supervision. I need a complete system flush and rebalancing before I can safely use the pool again. Dave walked around the pool perimeter, testing the water and making notes on his service sheet. Yeah, this is definitely contaminated. Sunscreen, body oils, probably food particles. I'm going to need to drain about 60% of the water and run a full filtration cycle. The whole process will take about 4 hours. 4 hours, Karen repeated thoughtfully. So you'll be running high-pressure water equipment until approximately 4 p.m. That's right. The filtration system cycles water at about 200 gallons per minute, so there's going to be a lot of water movement. Pretty loud, too. You might want to warn your neighbors. Karen's smile could have powered a small city. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what to expect. At 12:30, she heard voices in the Henderson backyard. Tyler and his friends were arriving early, probably hoping to get in some extra pool time before Karen noticed. She could hear them discussing strategy, debating whether they should ask permission this time, or just slip through the gate like yesterday. Karen positioned herself at her kitchen window with a fresh cup of coffee and her phone, ready to document every second of what was about to unfold. At exactly 1 p.m., Tyler appeared at her back gate with the same confident swagger he'd displayed yesterday, followed by what looked like an even larger group of teenagers. Mrs. Mitchell," Tyler called out, waving at her kitchen window. "Thanks for being cool about the pool thing. We brought our own towels today." Karen walked to her back door and opened it, stepping onto her deck with the kind of calm authority that had once made a city councilman apologize for breathing too loudly during a zoning meeting. "Tyler, I'm so glad you're here. I have something very special planned for this afternoon." Tyler grinned, clearly interpreting her calm tone as surrender. "Awesome. Should we just jump in, or do you want to say something first?" "Actually, I do want to say something." Karen pulled out her phone and opened her notes app, where she'd prepared a brief statement for the official record. "Tyler Henderson and assembled miners, you are hereby notified that this property is currently under active emergency safety protocols as authorized by the Willowbrook Estates HOA Board and in coordination with Henderson County Emergency Services." The teenagers stared at her blankly. Tyler's confident smile wavered slightly. "As of 12 p.m. today, this pool area has been designated as a community emergency preparedness demonstration site. All civilian access is suspended pending completion of official safety procedures." "Mrs. Mitchell," Tyler said slowly, "we just want to swim. Can't you do your safety thing later?" Karen's smile was absolutely radiant. "I'm afraid the safety demonstration is already in progress, Tyler. In fact, it's about to enter its most educational phase." On cue, Dave from Aquaclaire fired up the industrial filtration system. The sound was somewhere between a jet engine and a leaf blower, and water immediately began shooting from the pool's return jets with enough force to create visible waves across the surface. "What the hell is that?" shouted one of Tyler's friends over the mechanical roar. "That's a professional-grade pool filtration system," Karen called back, her voice carrying easily over the noise. "It's designed to cycle 200 gallons per minute at high pressure to remove contamination from unauthorized swimming incidents." Tyler's eyes widened as he realized what Karen Mitchell had never felt more professionally satisfied than she did at 2:03 p.m., standing in her backyard with 50 feet of fire hose in her hands, addressing an audience of 24 community members while 17 increasingly wet teenagers huddled near her fence like confused penguins. "The first thing everyone needs to understand about emergency water management," Karen announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 8 years perfecting the art of public speaking during contentious HOA meetings, "is that water pressure can be both a tool and a weapon." She gestured toward her pool, where Dave's industrial filtration system continued to churn the water into something resembling a small-scale hurricane. "What you're seeing here is a controlled demonstration of high-volume water displacement, designed to simulate flood conditions or fire suppression scenarios." Janet Woolsworth raised her hand like an eager student. "Karen, what kind of pressure are we talking about exactly?" "Excellent question, Janet." Karen had spent 2 hours this morning researching water pressure specifications, and she was delighted to share her newfound expertise. A standard residential garden hose delivers water at approximately 40 psi. Emergency fire suppression equipment, like what we'll be demonstrating today, operates at 150 to 200 psi. She could see Tyler's eyes widening as he did the math. 200 pounds per square inch was enough pressure to knock a person off their feet, which was exactly the point. "Now, before we begin the active demonstration," Karen continued, "I want everyone to observe proper safety protocols. All non-essential personnel should maintain a minimum distance of 20 feet from the target area." She looked directly at Tyler, and his friends were still clustered near the pool as if they couldn't quite accept that their swimming plans had been replaced by Karen's impromptu water safety seminar. "Tyler, as our primary community member affected by yesterday's unauthorized pool usage, would you like to volunteer to help demonstrate proper emergency evacuation procedures?" Tyler looked around at the assembled crowd of adults with cameras and notebooks, all of them watching him expectantly. "What do you mean, demonstrate?" "Well, since you and your friends have expressed such enthusiasm for water activities, I thought you might like to help show everyone what happens when emergency water protocols are activated in a recreational area." The reporter from the Henderson County Gazette looked up from his notebook. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you saying this demonstration is related to some kind of pool safety incident?" Karen's smile was absolutely luminous. "Yesterday, 17 miners gained unauthorized access to this pool area and engaged in unsupervised swimming activities that contaminated the water supply and created potential liability issues for the entire community. Today's demonstration is designed to show residents how emergency water systems can be used to rapidly clear recreational areas during safety emergencies." She gestured toward Tyler and his friends, who were now looking distinctly uncomfortable. "These young volunteers have graciously agreed to help us simulate a real-world emergency evacuation scenario." "We didn't agree to anything," muttered Tyler, but his voice was barely audible over the roar of the filtration system. "I'm sorry. Tyler, could you speak up? It's important that everyone understand the voluntary nature of community safety participation." Tyler's face was turning red, whether from embarrassment or anger, Karen couldn't tell. "I said we didn't volunteer for anything. We just came here to swim." "Ah, but that's exactly the point of today's demonstration." Karen clapped her hands. together like a teacher who'd just made a breakthrough with a difficult student. Emergency situations don't wait for convenient timing. When safety protocols need to be activated, they must take precedence over recreational activities. She picked up the fire hose and began connecting it to the spigot near her garden shed. For example, if there were a fire emergency in this area, firefighters would need to establish water access immediately, regardless of any swimming activities that might be in progress. "There's no fire emergency," Tyler protested, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Not today, thankfully," Karen agreed. "But emergency preparedness means practicing these procedures before they're needed. That's why we're simulating various scenarios that might require rapid pool area evacuation." She finished connecting the hose and turned on the water supply. Even at low pressure, the hose immediately stiffened and began producing a steady stream that could have knocked a basketball out of someone's hands at 30 feet. "Now, Tyler, if you and your friends would position yourselves near the pool edge, we can demonstrate proper emergency response protocols." "Mrs. Mitchell," Tyler said, and for the first time since Karen had known him, he sounded genuinely worried. "We don't want to be part of your demonstration. We'll just leave." Karen paused, her hand on the hose nozzle, and looked at Tyler with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Leave? But Tyler, you told me yesterday that you'd be using my pool again today. Don't you want to understand the safety procedures that govern recreational water usage?" The crowd of adults was watching this exchange with fascination. Karen could see Mrs. Peterson from 3 houses down taking video with her phone, and the HOA board members were scribbling notes that would undoubtedly make it into the official minutes of next month's meeting. "We changed our minds," Tyler said quickly. "We'll just go to the community center pool instead." "That's certainly an option," Karen acknowledged. "But since you're here, and since this demonstration is specifically designed to address the safety concerns raised by yesterday's incident, wouldn't it be more educational for everyone if you participated?" Tyler looked around desperately, as if searching for an adult who might intervene on his behalf. But every adult present was there specifically to support Karen's community safety initiative, and they were all watching him with the expectant attention of people waiting for a particularly interesting science experiment to begin. I don't think Tyler started, but Karen was already addressing the crowd again. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're about to see is a demonstration of rapid water deployment for area clearing. This technique is commonly used by emergency responders to quickly evacuate swimming areas during fire suppression operations or flood response scenarios." She raised the hose nozzle and adjusted the spray setting to its widest pattern. "The key is to use sufficient water volume and pressure to ensure immediate compliance with evacuation directives, while maintaining safety protocols that prevent injury to civilians." Karen turned toward Tyler and his friends, who were now backing away from the pool with the kind of cautious steps usually reserved for encounters with dangerous wildlife. "Tyler, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to ask you to pretend that you're a swimmer who hasn't responded to initial evacuation requests. Can you do that? Mrs. Mitchell, please remember, in a real emergency, every second counts. Emergency responders can't waste time with lengthy explanations or negotiations. They need techniques that ensure immediate compliance." Karen pulled the trigger on the hose nozzle. The result was spectacular. A concentrated stream of water shot across her backyard with enough force to clear leaves from trees, traveling in a perfect arc that landed precisely where Tyler had been standing 2 seconds earlier. Tyler had jumped aside with remarkable speed, but the spray caught 3 of his friends who hadn't been quite fast enough to interpret Karen's warning. The pink-haired girl from yesterday shrieked as the water hit her with enough force to spin her completely around and send her stumbling backward into Karen's prize-winning bag. 2 boys who'd been trying to look tough and unimpressed suddenly found themselves soaked and staggering, looking like they'd been caught in a horizontal waterfall. "Excellent reaction time," Karen called out over the sound of rushing water. "As you can see, proper water pressure ensures immediate area evacuation without the need for repeated warnings." She adjusted her aim, tracking Tyler as he scrambled around the pool's perimeter like a squirrel avoiding a garden sprinkler. But where a garden sprinkler might deliver a gentle mist, Karen's fire hose produced a stream that could strip paint from siding. "The key to effective emergency water deployment," Karen continued, speaking to her audience as if she were conducting a perfectly normal educational seminar while systematically soaking 17 teenagers, "is consistent pressure application that makes remaining in the target area physically uncomfortable." Tyler slipped on the wet deck and went down hard, sliding several feet across the smooth concrete before coming to rest against Karen's outdoor furniture. Karen immediately adjusted her spray pattern to avoid hitting him directly, but made sure to maintain enough water volume around his position that standing up would require moving through the stream. "Note how the subject naturally seeks shelter and higher ground," Karen observed, as Tyler army crawled behind her tick dining set. "This is exactly the kind of rapid evacuation response we want to see in real emergency situations." The Henderson County Gazette reporter was writing furiously, occasionally looking up to watch Karen work the hose with the precision of someone who'd spent considerable time practicing. Janet Woolsworth was nodding approvingly and taking pictures that would undoubtedly be featured. Karen woke up Monday morning to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and an email inbox that looked like it had been hit by a digital hurricane. The Henderson County Gazette had run a front-page story titled "Local HOA President Innovates Community Safety, Education," complete with a photo of Karen holding the fire hose and looking like someone who had just solved world peace through creative water management. The story had been picked up by 3 regional newspapers, 2 local TV stations, and something called Community Management Today, which apparently was a real publication that reached HOA presidents across 6 states. Karen's phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. with requests for interviews, invitations to speak at conferences, and what appeared to be several job offers from property management companies. But the call that made Karen's coffee go cold came at 7:15 a.m. from a number she didn't recognize with a Houston area code. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Amanda Chen with Channel 12 News Houston. We'd like to send a crew to interview you about your innovative approach to community management. Our story is tentatively titled "The HOA President Who Solved Teenage Pool Problems with Fire Hose Diplomacy." Karen set down her coffee cup very carefully. "I'm sorry, Houston, how did you hear about our community safety demonstration? Your story went viral on social media overnight. The video of you conducting the emergency water deployment demonstration has been shared over 50,000 times, and frankly, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Parents across the country are calling you a hero. It went viral," Karen repeated slowly. "Mrs. Peterson's video from Saturday. It's been viewed 180,000 times since Sunday evening. The comments are incredible. Parents saying they wish their neighborhoods had someone like you. HOA presidents asking for training, materials, teenagers saying they'll never trespass on anyone's property again. You've become something of a community management celebrity." Karen hung up the phone and immediately opened her laptop, searching for HOA President Fire Hose Pool Party. The results made her feel like she was living in some kind of parallel universe where her Saturday afternoon had become national entertainment. Mrs. Peterson's video had indeed gone viral, but it wasn't just the video. Someone had created a complete online timeline of the incident, including Tyler's social media posts from Friday night bragging about his plans to use the crazy HOA ladies' pool again, photos of Karen's professionally organized demonstration, and follow-up interviews with several of the teenagers involved. The internet had apparently decided that Karen Mitchell was either a brilliant community leader or a dangerous vigilante, depending on which comment section you read. But overwhelmingly, the response was positive, with parents sharing their own stories of teenagers who disrespected property, boundaries, and neighbors. Praising Karen's creative problem-solving approach, Karen's phone rang again. This time it was Steve, her lawyer, and he sounded like he'd been drinking espresso since 5 a.m. "Karen, please tell me you've seen the news coverage." "I'm looking at it now," Karen said weakly. "Steve, is this going to be a legal problem?" "Legal problem? Karen, I've got 3 law firms calling me this morning wanting to hire you as a consultant for community management cases. You've accidentally become the poster child for creative property rights enforcement." Karen scrolled through more comments, trying to process the fact that her Saturday afternoon had somehow become a case study in effective neighborhood governance. But what about Tyler? His parents could still file complaints, right? Against what? You have documentation showing official authorization, professional oversight, educational objectives, and community safety justification. Plus, Karen, the kid trespassed on your property after being explicitly told not to, then publicly announced his intention to continue trespassing. You didn't just have the right to take action. Most people would say you had an obligation to address the situation. Karen was about to respond when she heard voices in her front yard. Through her window, she could see a news van parked in her driveway and a woman with perfectly styled hair speaking into a microphone while standing next to Karen's award-winning rose garden. "Steve, there's a news crew in my front yard." 8. "I don't know. Should I talk to them?" "Karen, you're a public figure now, whether you like it or not. My advice is to stick to your message: community safety, property rights, educational demonstration, and effective consequences for disrespectful behavior. Half the parents in America are going to want to nominate you for sainthood." Karen hung up and spent the next 20 minutes getting dressed and preparing for what she was starting to realize would be the most unusual Monday of her life. By the time she walked outside to meet the news crew, 2 more vans had arrived, and Mrs. Peterson was giving an interview to someone with a camera while standing in her own driveway. Mrs. Mitchell, the perfectly styled reporter, approached Karen with the kind of enthusiastic energy usually reserved for lottery winners or political scandals. "I'm Sarah Martinez from Channel 8 News. Could we have a few minutes to discuss your innovative approach to community management?" Karen found herself standing in her own front yard at 8:30 a.m. on a Monday morning, explaining to a television audience how emergency water safety protocols could be used to address teenage trespassing issues. It was surreal, but it was also oddly satisfying to describe her methods to people who seemed genuinely interested in effective community leadership. The interview lasted 15 minutes. with Karen carefully emphasizing the educational and safety aspects of her demonstration while avoiding any language that might sound vindictive or excessive. By the time the news crew finished, Karen felt like she'd just given a very public presentation on the benefits of creative problem-solving in residential governance. But the real test of Karen's newfound celebrity status came at 9:45 a.m., when Linda Henderson knocked on her door with an expression that suggested she'd also been dealing with unexpected media attention. "Karen, we need to talk." Again, more coffee, Karen offered, but Linda was already walking toward the kitchen with the kind of determined stride that suggested this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. "Tyler's school called this morning," Linda said without preamble. "Apparently, several of his classmates saw the video and have been asking him about the pool party fire hose incident. He's completely mortified." Karen poured coffee for both of them, trying to gauge Linda's mood. "How is he handling the attention?" "He's handling it by refusing to leave his room and declaring that his life is over because everyone thinks he got beaten by a middle-aged HOA president with a garden hose." "It wasn't a garden hose," Karen corrected gently. "It was professional emergency equipment operated according to proper safety protocols." Linda stared at her. "Karen, I know you think you were teaching Tyler a lesson about consequences, but now he's famous on the internet as the teenager who got owned by his HOA president. That's going to follow him for years." Karen sat down across from Linda, realizing that the conversation she'd been expecting since Saturday was finally happening. "Linda, what exactly would you like me to do? Apologize for defending my property? Pretend that Tyler's behavior was acceptable? Issue a public statement saying that teenagers should be allowed to use other people's pools without permission? I want you to help me figure out how to handle this so Tyler can learn from his mistakes without being nationally humiliated." Karen studied Linda's face, seeing genuine concern for her son rather than anger at Karen's methods. It was exactly the kind of parental accountability that Karen had been hoping to encourage with 8 years of community management. "Linda, Tyler chose to trespass on my property after being explicitly told not to. He chose to announce his intention to continue trespassing. He chose to show up on Saturday with an even larger group of friends, clearly expecting that I would just accept his behavior. The consequences he's experiencing now are the direct result of choices he made. But the internet attention is focusing on Tyler's poor judgment and my effective response. If Tyler is embarrassed, that's because he engaged in embarrassing behavior, not because I documented it." Linda was quiet for several minutes, sipping her coffee and apparently working through the logic of Karen's position. When she finally spoke, her voice was tired but resigned. "You're right. Tyler made bad choices, and he's facing the consequences. But as his mother, I'm watching my 16-year-old son learn about accountability through national media coverage, and that's terrifying." Karen reached across the table and touched Linda's hand again. "Linda, Tyler is learning that actions have consequences and that adults have more resources than teenagers usually consider. Those are valuable lessons that will serve him well for the rest of his life. And what if he doesn't recover from this? What if he becomes the kid who's famous for getting humiliated by his neighbor?" Karen's smile was gentle but firm. "Then he'll be the kid who learned early that respect for other people's property isn't negotiable, and that community leaders take their responsibilities seriously. Honestly, Linda, there are worse reputations to have." Linda finished her coffee and gathered her purse, but she paused at Karen's door. "Karen, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." 3 weeks after the fire hose incident, Karen Mitchell had become something she'd never expected to be, a minor celebrity in the world of community management. She'd given 4 television interviews, spoken at 2 HOA conferences, and had her emergency water deployment demonstration featured in a training video for property managers across 3 states. But on this particular Thursday morning, as Karen stood at her kitchen window watching Tyler Henderson meticulously weed her flower beds as part of his voluntary community service, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was building toward a confrontation she hadn't anticipated. Tyler had been the model of respectful behavior for 3 weeks. He arrived promptly at 8 a.m. every morning, worked diligently on whatever tasks Karen assigned, and spoke to her with the kind of polite deference usually reserved for judges and emergency room doctors. He'd cleaned her pool equipment, reorganized her garden shed, and even helped her install new solar lights along the community walking path. It should have been exactly what Karen wanted, a formerly rebellious teenager learning the value of community service and respect for authority. But something about Tyler's compliance felt performative, like he was playing a role rather than genuinely accepting his circumstances. Karen's suspicions were confirmed at 8:47 a.m. when Tyler knocked on her door with an expression that suggested he had something important to discuss. "Mrs. Mitchell, could I talk to you for a minute?" Of course, Tyler, come in." Tyler followed Karen into her kitchen, but instead of sitting down, he remained standing with the kind of formal posture that suggested he'd been practicing this conversation. "Mrs. Mitchell, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to do community service. It's taught me a lot about neighborhood maintenance and the work that goes into keeping Willowbrook Estates looking good." Karen poured herself coffee and studied Tyler's face. "I'm glad you found it educational." "I have." and I've also learned a lot about HOA regulations, property management, procedures, and community governance structures. Something in Tyler's tone made Karen's coffee taste suddenly bitter. Oh, Tyler's smile was polite, respectful, and absolutely terrifying. Yes, ma'am. For example, I learned that emergency water deployment demonstrations require permits from the county if they're conducted on private property with public attendance and media coverage. Karen set down her coffee cup very carefully. Tyler, what exactly are you saying? I'm saying that I've spent 3 weeks researching community management regulations, emergency services protocols, and property use permits, and I've discovered some very interesting information about the legal requirements for public safety demonstrations. Tyler pulled out his phone and showed Karen a screenshot of what appeared to be Henderson County Municipal Code. According to Section 14.7(3) of the County Emergency Services Regulations, any demonstration of emergency equipment that involves water deployment at pressures exceeding 100 psi on private property requires advance notification to the fire marshal's office and a temporary permit for public safety education events. Karen's mouth went dry. Tyler, you had board authorization and coordination with emergency services, but you didn't have the specific permits required for public demonstrations of emergency equipment, which means your fire hose demonstration, while creative and effective, was technically conducted without proper municipal authorization. Tyler's smile widened slightly. I also learned that social media documentation of improperly permitted emergency equipment demonstrations can result in fines ranging from $500 to $2,000, depending on the scope of public attendance and media coverage. Karen stared at Tyler Henderson, 16-year-old erstwhile pool party organizer, and realized she was looking at someone who had spent 3 weeks systematically researching municipal regulations for the specific purpose of finding leverage against her. Tyler, what do you want? Mrs. Mitchell, I want to propose a mutually beneficial arrangement that addresses both of our interests in this situation. Tyler sat down at Karen's kitchen table and pulled out a folder that looked suspiciously like the kind of official documentation Karen herself used for HOA presentations. You taught me an important lesson about consequences and the importance of understanding all the rules before you act. So I've spent 3 weeks learning all the rules that apply to community management, emergency services, coordination, and public safety demonstrations. Karen sat down across from Tyler, feeling like she was about to negotiate with a teenage version of herself. I'm listening. My proposal is simple. You agree to write a letter of recommendation for my college applications, specifically highlighting my community service work and my understanding of local governance procedures. In exchange, I agree to continue my voluntary community service through the end of the summer and to file a formal statement with the county acknowledging that your emergency water demonstration was conducted for legitimate educational purposes. Tyler opened his folder and showed Karen a typed document. I've already drafted this statement, explaining that as a participant in your demonstration, I can verify that proper safety protocols were followed and that the educational objectives were achieved. This statement would provide official participant testimony supporting the legitimacy of your methods, which should address any potential permit compliance issues. Karen read through Tyler's statement, which was professionally written, factually accurate, and would indeed provide exactly the kind of participant documentation that could resolve any municipal regulatory concerns. Tyler, this is very thorough. Thank you. I learned from an excellent teacher about the importance of proper documentation and preparation. Karen looked up from the statement to study Tyler's face. Are you blackmailing me? Tyler's expression was earnest and respectful. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm proposing a professional arrangement that benefits both parties. You receive official documentation supporting your community safety methods, and I receive recognition for the community service work I've genuinely been doing for 3 weeks, and if I don't agree to this arrangement, Tyler's smile remained polite, but Karen could see calculation behind his eyes. Then I suppose you'll need to address the permit compliance issues through normal municipal channels, which could involve paperwork, fees, and potentially some awkward questions about the relationship between HOA authority and county emergency services regulations. Karen leaned back in her chair, trying to process the fact that Tyler Henderson had spent 3 weeks conducting the kind of detailed regulatory research that she usually associated with experienced property managers or legal professionals. Tyler, how did you learn to do this level of municipal research? I spent a lot of time at the county offices, asking questions about community management, regulations. It turns out that when you tell government employees you're doing research for a school project about local governance, they're very helpful about explaining permit procedures and regulatory compliance requirements. Tyler closed his folder and looked directly at Karen. Mrs. Mitchell, 3 weeks ago you taught me that community authority figures have resources I hadn't considered. Today I'm demonstrating that I've learned that lesson very well. Karen was quiet for several minutes, considering her options. Tyler's research was accurate, his documentation was professional, and his proposal was actually quite reasonable. More importantly, His approach showed exactly the kind of thorough preparation and strategic thinking that Karen had been trying to encourage in community residents for 8 years. Tyler, your community service work has been exemplary, and your research demonstrates impressive attention to detail. I'd be happy to write you a letter of recommendation. Tyler's smile became genuinely warm for the first time in 3 weeks. Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. I really appreciate that. But I have one condition. Tyler's expression became carefully neutral again. Yes, ma'am. I want you to present your research findings to the HOA board at next month's meeting. If you're this good at municipal regulatory research, the community could benefit from your skills. Tyler blinked twice, clearly not having expected this response. You want me to help the HOA, Tyler? You've just demonstrated research abilities that most board members don't possess. If you're interested in community governance, there are productive ways to apply those skills that don't involve finding regulatory loopholes. Karen poured Tyler a cup of coffee and sat back down. You could help the board ensure that all our community improvement projects comply with county regulations. You could research grant opportunities for neighborhood development. You could even help other residents navigate permit procedures for home improvements. Tyler stared at her. You're offering me an actual role in community management? I'm offering you an opportunity to use what you've learned for constructive purposes. You've clearly got an aptitude for this kind of work, and the community could use someone with your research skills. Tyler was quiet for several minutes, apparently trying to process the idea that his carefully planned confrontation with Karen had somehow turned into a job offer. Mrs. Mitchell, 3 weeks ago, I thought you were just a power-hungry neighbor who liked to boss people around.